All right, everybody, I just finished up setting up your last practical for BIO259, the practical on the brain. And I went and I checked some of your responses in terms of what you wanted me to cover. And I want to show you a couple things using this brain model over here. We're going to be looking at how do you tell specific versus general structures. We're going to crack open the brain a little bit and look at some of the ventricles and also things that have to do with the diencephalon. So let's take a look at this brain. So looking at our brain, a couple of things should be pretty obvious, especially in this one where it's so brightly colored. First of all, you'll see that there is a sulcus that runs all the way down the lateral side of the brain. That is specifically known as a central sulcus. So if I have markers pointing into this space, and I ask you identify the space, be specific, I'm looking specifically for the central sulcus. Now, if I mark this or any other of these grooves, any other of these sulcuses, or what is the general term for this structure, then I'm just looking for sulcus, right? But again, when I say be specific, it is going to be a named sulcus like the central sulcus. Okay, let's look at these two other regions then, right? I left that up. Let's look at these two other regions. Here we have a very brightly red colored region, or this bump, and here we have a purple color bump that's sticking out. The general term for these things are gyruses. So this is a gyrus because it's a bump that's sticking out. This is same as this gyrus, that's a gyrus, this is a gyrus, that's a gyrus. Right? And so generally, if I'm going to tag something and say identify the structure, what is the general term, it would just be gyrus. But if I said be specific, now we have a different term. If I ask you to be specific, this is actually going to be known as the precentral gyrus. How do you know? So here is the anterior side or the front, here's the posterior side or the back. If we look at the central sulcus, this gyrus is before it, right? It's pre, right? So that's the precentral gyrus sticking out. And so what that means is the specific term for this purple one out here is going to be the post-central gyrus. Precentral in red, post-central in purple. Now, one other thing that we need to look at when it comes to the brain is how do you tell the difference between, let's say, the gray matter and the cerebral cortex? So to demonstrate this, I'm going to take half the brain and I'm going to take this section out here so we can see what's going on inside. And so the most important thing that I want you to see here is we have a very dark colored region on the outside of the brain, right? That is all gray matter, even though it's yellow and pink and orange here. We just refer to that as gray matter. And all of the stuff that is inside, that is this whitish color, that's white matter. So this is, as a general term, is going to be gray matter. If I say identify the structure, be general, this is going to be white matter, right? Another way I could ask this question is, what type of matter do you find here, right? And then the answer is going to be gray. What type of matter do you find here? It's going to be white. Now, one confusing thing is if I mark the gray matter out here and I say identify the structure, be specific. Now I'm asking for a very, very specific term. It's not just gray matter. This entire region is going to be known as the cerebral cortex. Why? Just because by definition, cerebral cortex is the gray matter of the cerebral hemisphere. So this is part of the cerebral hemisphere. We see that this is the gray matter. So even though the general term is gray matter, the specific term is cerebral cortex. Pay really close attention to the cards that I put on the table and try to see, do I ask you for a general term or a specific term? Let's put this back together so we can take another look at the diencephalon. Okay, so what is going to be the diencephalon? It's going to be your thalamus and actually your hypothalamus as well. Hypothalamus is pointing anteriorly and inferiorly, so it's pointing forward and down. So that's your hypothalamus. This egg-shaped structure right here, that's going to be your thalamus. Together, if I highlight the thalamus and the hypothalamus, I am asking you about the diencephalon. So just make sure you understand what am I asking for, what's being tagged. Is it just the thalamus? Is it just the hypothalamus? Or is it both? And if it's both, it'll be the diencephalon. Now, the other thing that you'll see here with this model is there's this space over here, right? This is actually showing you one of the lateral ventricles, in this case, the right lateral ventricle. And remember, a ventricle is just space, it's fluid filled. So you have a lateral ventricle here. But if you look at the other side of the brain, you'll see that there is not a gap, right? So what's ending up happening in this model is if you were to drill past this layer, past this septum pellucidum, this split layer, you would actually find another lateral ventricle. You don't see it here in this model, but again, if you imagine just poking through, if we poke through the septum pellucidum, we would see another lateral ventricle that looks just like this. Okay, so the lateral ventricle is connected to the third ventricle. Where's the third ventricle? Well, it is actually kind of where you find the thalamus. And if I tilt this slightly, what do you see? There's a little bit of a gap, a little bit of a space. The space surrounding the thalamus is going to be the third ventricle, right? So make sure you're paying attention to the card. Am I saying identify the structure, or am I saying identify the space? So that's your third ventricle. If we follow this down, what do we see? We're connecting via the cerebral aqueduct, finally down to the triangular fourth ventricle over here. So that's going to be the last place that we have a ventricle, where it kind of all empties down out of the cerebral aqueduct. And then finally, it's just going to leak its way down the spinal cord, eventually reaching the central canal, which again is going to go all the way down the spinal cord. So that was a fairly quick video, just running through some of the structures that might be kind of confusing when it comes to the brain. The best advice that I can give you is just to make sure you read every single card and read every single part of the questions, right? Am I asking for a general structure? Am I asking you to be specific? Am I giving you a clue in the question saying identify this lobe or identify this gland? All those things should be pretty helpful for your lab practical. All right, best of luck studying, best of luck on the lab practical. We're almost done with this class. I'll see you next time.